HaShoah School. And I'd just like to take a few moments for all of us to kind of be here all at the same time, coming from the different exercises of the day to this very special room that all day long was the memorial for Yom HaShoah that the kids in the lower school and middle school participated in, with some of the candles burning on my left, and a memorial wall that was created by the children and family members of the children. And to have that transform into an event where this evening we have the opportunity to experience personally someone's experience of that very event. For years we've been coming together and we sit next to one another, some of whom recognize each other, some who don't. And just for the moment to kind of bring forward what this event has the capacity to do is if I could just possibly introduce or ask those in the audience here that are survivors to please stand. Thank you. And I'd like to also ask those who are children of survivors to please stand. Am I the only one getting my children's room? This is quite extraordinary that all of us in this one room have the capacity to reach and touch each other, that have that link back to the moment that we are wanting to keep in our hearts and in our prayers tonight. And I'm standing with the children of survivors as well. I would also like to ask those who are members of the Holocaust Committee to please rise. And we'd like to thank each and every one of you for the incredible devotion and commitment you have to helping us to maintain this journey that we're on, to bring together our collective memory and the stories of our parents and our grandparents so that the future generations of the school and the community will have a legacy to pass on to future generations. And at this point, I'd like to introduce Roanna, the head of our school.
Good evening. Thank you, Harry, and thank you for all you've done in your position with this committee. Really appreciate it. I know it's a labor of love. I do also just want to take a minute to thank the people who are on the subcommittee. Please stand. Joan Winogrand, Suzanne Weinstein, and Eva Stoll. I really want to thank you for your efforts and for what you've done for this evening. And now, I just want to take a moment to both tell you how touching it is to see both young people here and some not quite so young people here. It reminds me, actually, of what is unique about this school and what HaShoah education is about. I'm not going to speak to you tonight about education in general and why people create schools. But certainly you know that people create schools to replicate, mostly because they want to replicate certain things in society, and sometimes to be certain that certain things in society are never again, anywhere replicated. The purpose of the HaShoah education is to elevate the human being. to be certain that we treat each other with dignity, and to be certain that we never forget. Memory is a very important part of what makes us human. I would say it is the thing, in many ways, that I care most about. People knowing where they came from and where they're going. Tonight is another opportunity for us to reflect on where we came from. And as you leave here later this evening, I hope that in some ways you will be elevated by where your children are going. I truly believe that this next generation of young people who are being educated will do everything that they can to see that never again really is never again. So I welcome you all here this evening. I thank you for being here. I particularly am touched to see some of our parents of graduates here. And please know that you are all always welcome here. The first thing we're going to do this evening, first thing on the program, is going to be just a little bit of a shift here. And we're going to have the HaShoah harmonizers from our high school who were fortunate enough to hear Mr. Weinstein this morning. And then after they have left, so that there was a flow to the evening, as soon as they leave, I'm going to ask Mr. Eddie Weinstein and Michael and his family to come up and to do the memorial candle lighting, after which he will introduce his father. So first, again, this evening, we're not going to have any clapping or anything, just in keeping with the tone of the evening, but I know we will welcome the HaShoah harmonizers just as being ready to hear them. HaShoah harmonizers.
We have two songs for you tonight. The first one is a Karabach melody, it's called B'Shem Hashem, and the second one is a song called Darkanu. So again, I'd like to thank you for having us, and we're the HaShoah harmonizers.
heard some of the voices of the future, and now I'm going to please call on Mr. Weinstein to come forward with Michael and the family for the memorial candlelighting, please.
At this point, people who are responsible for the lighting of candles should light the first candle in each row, and then the light to the tenth one. Thank you, Rowan, and thank you to the Holocaust Commemoration Committee for the opportunity to introduce my father, Eddie Weinstein. I've always known my father to be very optimistic, have a very optimistic view of people. This optimism seems in conflict with his early life in Europe. As a child, I knew that my dad had survived the Treblinka concentration camp. My brother Larry and I knew that his mother, our grandmother, had been killed during the expulsion of Jews from this town, and that his brother, our uncle, was killed in Treblinka. We didn't learn the details through a systematic account. Rather, it was a picture that was slowly filled in with details at random times. It was the letter returned to my dad many years later that he had written to a cousin in the Soviet Union after he was liberated, but while the war still raged. It was written in small, meticulously formed script in Polish, detailing what had happened to the family. There was an undergarment my father took out to show us. He had found it among the piles of clothing in Treblinka. He wore it then and later treasured it. He showed us the buttons and the stitching. It was handmade and of high quality. Who was this man? Was he from Warsaw? They were the descriptions and rough drawings of his hiding place he constructed with his father and two others in a fish hatchery after his escape from Treblinka. And there was a stack of pages, unbound, typed by my father in a DP camp in Germany immediately after the war, on a typewriter, Smith Corona, in Yiddish, with English letters. These pages form the nucleus of a book he recently completed and which has been published by HaShoah. He showed and discussed these within the family, and then to my wife and sister-in-law when they joined our family, and now to his grandchildren. These are family heirlooms, very powerful heirlooms. In 1994, my father, my stepmother Judy, and I traveled to Poland. We visited my father's hometown of Lushice, the road to Szedlice along which the Jewish community was forced to march to the trains. We visited Treblinka, and outside his hometown found his hiding place of nearly 2 years within a fish hatchery. This visit catalyzed my dad's return to and completion of his memoir with great passion and focus. Since then, my dad has brought this passion and focus to the telling of what he lived through and what he saw happen to others during the darkest period of our people and indeed of humanity. This drive to share his experiences with groups ranging from ones like this within the Jewish community to groups of individuals who have had little or no contact with or knowledge of the Jewish people comes from a deep-seated feeling of responsibility. It reflects his optimism, so characteristic of the way he lives, that people will listen, begin to comprehend, and therefore transmit this knowledge to future generations. And so now I introduce my father, Eddie Weinstein.
Good evening, and thank you for inviting me. Ladies and gentlemen, as a witness to the Holocaust, I will try to tell you my story, what happened to me, my family and the 8,000 Jews who were living in our town during the Second World War. I was born in Loszyce, Poland, a small town 75 miles east of Warsaw. I had a younger brother, his name was Israel. My parents were poor, so were about 90% of the population of our town. When I was 15, the Germans invaded Poland and soon occupied our town. They ordered the Jews to organize a Jewish council, a Judenrat, with a Jewish police to run the Jewish affairs. The public schools and city hall was for non-Jews only. 2 months later, they took out 6 Jews and they killed them on the outskirts of town. This was done to put a fear in the Jewish population. All the Jews had to wear armbands with the Star of David. All the Jews had to work for the Germans without food and without pay. We could not use public transportation. The curfew for the Jews was much shorter for non-Jews. August 1940, exactly a year since the Germans invaded our town, occupied our town. The Russians, when the Germans got in 1940, in 1939, the Germans and the Russians signed a non-aggression pact, and the Russians took part of Poland up to the river Bug, which it was only 12 miles from our town. The Germans in 1940 were getting ready to invade Russia. A large contingent of German engineers arrived. Since our railroad station was only 9 miles from the Russian border, from the new Russian border, they demanded 400 young men and boys to work on the railroad line. I was amongst them. We were building 16 railroad lines and a spare to turn around the trains, a ramp about a mile long. This was in preparation for the German army to gather for the invasion of Russia, for the millions of German soldiers. It seems that the Germans had a deadline to fulfill, and we were chased. We were always on the run. A lot of boys were wounded. A lot of boys and men were wounded. Some died of the wounds. The job was finished the end of February 1941. And then the military started arriving. And we had to help them build barracks, widen roads, maintain the barracks. And then, as you know, the 22nd of June 1941, the Germans invaded Russia. And behind the German military lines, Einsatzgruppen, killing squad, SS Einsatzgruppen, killing squads, were rounding up Jews in the occupied territories. They were, at the beginning, they came with trucks and they ordered the Jewish men, to come to the market square. And they told them they are needed for work. And they took them to the forest and killed them. And then they started killing all communities. The biggest massacre was near the capital of Kiev, Babi Yar, where in a ravine, in 2 days, the SS Einsatzgruppen killed close to 34,000 Jews. November 1941, it was already 2 years and 3 months since the Germans occupied our town. 2 years and 3 months without income. Our parents, to feed their families, had to sell everything of value they possessed, even furniture. There were a lot of refugees in our town. They didn't have what to sell. They were always begging for food. But the biggest blow came, the worst blow came on December 1, 1941, when the Germans established a ghetto. And this isolated us from normal life. Part of town was designated for the ghetto. All the Jews had to move in this part of town. The overcrowding was unbearable. People were sleeping in attics and basements and hallways and steps. There was no roof for everybody. They posted signs forbidding to leave the ghetto under penalty of death. The first incident occurred when a German policeman caught 3 Jews outside the ghetto, about 15 feet outside the ghetto. He took their names and let them go. A couple nights later, they were taken out in the middle of the night and killed. Since then, if a Jew was caught foot outside the ghetto, he was killed on the spot. The winters, the temperature is usually important below 0. We could not go out to buy wood or coal to heat apartments, to houses. People started getting colds. There was no medicine, not even aspirin. A typhus epidemic broke out in the ghetto. People started dying like flies in the late fall, in the hundreds. Since the cemetery was outside the ghetto, only one member of a family was allowed to take the body for burial. December 8, 1941, the first extermination in Kelno was opened. The German SS, the Einsatzgruppen, in the occupied territory in Russia, they were killing all communities, and they came to the conclusion that this method is neither quick nor efficient. They had to kill everybody with a bullet, sometimes with 2 bullets, and it took a long time. So, and also, the people in the areas knew what's going on. They could hear the shootings, and they could hear the cries of the women and children while they were waiting in line to be killed. In Kelno, they started to kill Jews in vans, in gas vans. They got up 50 to 70 Jews in a gas van, They locked the doors and they piped in the exhaust into the van. And within half an hour they were dead. And then they had to drive them to the forest where other Jews were digging graves for them. And they had to pull them out and put them in the graves and clean out the vans and go back. This took a long time, and there were still millions of Jews in the ghettos. They had to come up with something better and faster. So a month later, in January of 1942, near Berlin, Wannsee, 15 senior officials under Heinrich Heydrich gathered to decide what to do with the Jews. This was the first time in the history of the world that a government decided to kill an entire people. And they called this the final solution. They came up with the idea they're going to build 6 killing centers with airtight buildings, with shower heads. And they'll bring the Jews there, they'll tell them they're going east to work to the occupied territories of Russia. And instead water, carbon monoxide or poison gas will come. And that's what they did. And when you was inside, it was too late. March 1942, I was taken with 200 young men and boys to a concentration camp. The work consisted of breaking up with large hammers, big boulders for gravel to maintain the roads for the German army leading towards the Russian front. We were working from dawn to dusk. We were working in snow and in rain. In Poland, sometimes it's snowing even May. And this was a March. Most of us got sick with fever, with sores. We were sleeping in unheated barracks. We were given very little food. It was already 23 days since I arrived there. I was sick, and I was full of lies. I felt I'm not going to last too long. I decided, I talked to a friend of mine, Michael Rack, about escaping. The next day we made our escape. During the day we were hiding in a barn, and at night we made our way back home. When we arrived home a couple of days later, the Jewish Council, the Judenrat, found out about our escape. They sent the Jewish police to arrest me. I wasn't hiding. They arrested my mother instead. When my father came from work, he offered the Jewish Council to take my place. Father was afraid if recognized I'll be killed. The punishment for escaping was death. They agreed, and the next day my father was shipped off to the concentration camp, and I was given a job 3 miles from town. Saturday, August 22, 1942. The ghetto was surrounded with German Einsatzgruppen. People started out to go to work. I used to start out to go to work also about 5 a.m. We were shot at. Some young men and boys were killed. So we ran back in the houses. We didn't know what's happening. About an hour later, the Jewish police started announcing all the Jews take some belongings and assemble on the market square. Who will not obey will be killed. When we arrived on the market square, there were already farmers with horse-driven wagons waiting for us. The women and little children were told to climb aboard. The rest of us were told to line up near the church in rows of 8 to 12. The farmers were there. It was chaos. The SS gave contradictory orders, and the women and children were crying. The farmers with their horse-driven wagons were told to start out first. When they passed us by near the church, the SS pulled off some elderly men who got on and a few younger women, and they killed them on the spot. When the farmers left, when they left town, we were told to start marching. When we were on the outskirts of town, the shooting started. SS in convertibles and trucks started shooting in the tail of the crowd. It was a very hot day. Everybody started running, who could run, of course. We were running in a cloud of dust. We could hardly see the road. We were thirsty, but were not allowed to drink from the wells we passed. At a later date, we found out the SS killed all the elderly and the sick, including the rabbi of our town. Some tried to escape, but were gunned down. We caught up with the horse-driven wagons. About 18 miles down the road, they stopped everybody. Again, they let the horse-driven wagons pass first. I saw my mother following one of the wagons. This was the last time in my life I saw my mother. And then we were told to start marching. When we arrived into the town of Szczecice, a distance of 20 miles, it started to get dark. You could see the farmers racing home with all the belongings of the Jews. We were pushed in a big field where once was our old Jewish cemetery. We were told to sit down. All night they were shooting at us. You could hear the screams of the wounded and the cries of the people around them. Searchlights were lighting up the fences of the cemetery. In the morning, they ordered the Jewish police to come out and remove the dead from amongst us. As the sun was rising, the heat, it became hotter. The thirst became unbearable. The women and the children were crying for water, begging for water. About 2 p.m., we were marched to the freight railroad station. When we arrived there were no trains. It was war. They told us to sit down. Everybody was begging the SS for water, crying for water. The head of the SS announced that we'll soon be getting water and bread. About an hour later, a fire engine arrived. The mass of people, unable to control themselves, were pressing against the fire truck from every direction. The firemen couldn't handle it. They started to spray the water on top of the people's heads. People were pushing closer to get wet, to be able to take off their clothing and to squeeze out a little water. Some were drinking the muddy water that was flowing on the ground. When the firemen finished, they left. Again, we were told to sit down. There were no trains. We were told to sit down. Sometimes some people stood up and started screaming. They became crazy, or they lost somebody in the family or something. The SS started shooting from every direction. They killed them, and they killed a bunch of people around them. As darkness fell, the same nightmare, the heat, the women and the children crying for water, and the shooting into the crowd, the screams of the window. This was going on all night. This was already the second night, Sunday night. Finally, Monday morning, an empty cattle car train arrived. It was already exactly 2 days since we left town. They started to push us in with their rifle butts, fast, fast. My brother and I were from the first ones to get in. We stationed ourselves near that little window, those windows from the cattle cars, to get some air. The cattle car quickly filled up. You could see people passing out, fainting, but the density of the people kept them from falling. There was no air. My brother and I, realizing we'll soon die, we reacted in the only way possible. We pushed ourselves up on top of the people's heads. With a superhuman effort, managed to get out. To this day, I don't know how we did it. Better to be killed from a bullet than to suffocate. On the ramp, there was still a couple hundred people left. The SS, realizing they can't push in any more bodies, they pushed them in like herrings in some cattle cars. Added on a few more cattle cars. We got in, and it was standing room only. In the cattle car, I saw my Aunt Leah with 3 children. She told me that her husband, my mother's brother, was killed the night before on the old cemetery. The train started moving. We had no idea where they're taking us. We could hear shots from the guards on the train. People who were dying in those cattle cars where they pushed in like herring. They were dying there from the heat and the hydration. So they broke open the little windows and they were jumping. And the guards on the train were shooting at them. About 3 hours later, the train stopped on a station. And the name of the station was Treblinka. On the station there was a water pump. From those cattle cars where they were dying, people were jumping to get some water. They broke open the little windows and they were jumping. And every one of them was killed. About 10 minutes later, part of the train was taken away. We realized that this is our final destination, where we're going to be living and working. But nobody in his wildest dreams could have imagined what they're going to do to us, what they're going to do to our mothers, fathers, and children. Nobody. People were still jumping from the balance of the train. They were walking like drunks, half naked. They could see the other people are being shot, but they just didn't care. Maybe they'll be the lucky ones to get a little water on their lips. 2 hours later, another 20 cattle cows were taken away. It took the SS 2 hours to liquidate, to kill 20 cattle cows full of juice. Our part of train was pushed in when it started to get dark. We could see lights all over through the little windows. And then, when we stopped on the ramp, we looked out, we saw bodies almost up to the little windows. Dead bodies, suffocated bodies, in the thousands. Everybody started crying, Shema Israel. The doors swung open. SS and other guards were assaulting the people. Young men and boys to the right. And the rest of them, the women and the children, the girls and the older men to the left. And they took him into a very long building, which it was maybe 1,000 foot long. And us, they told to start putting out the deaths from the wagons. In some cattle cars, there were 60 to 70% suffocated people. You could see mothers still clutching their children, husbands still embracing their wives. In some cattle cars, 3 generations died together. I knew those people. They were from my town, and some were from my family. When we finished pulling up, the train left. Then we were told to pull the bodies into large ditches. All night we worked under the lights. A lot of the workers were killed in the night. In the morning, a large digging machine arrived and started to excavate 3 large pits against the fence. There was no more room for the dead. And we started putting the bodies there. About 8 a.m., a maintenance train arrived, 3 flatbed cars. And on the first and the third were sitting in SS and guards. And the middle one was empty. They ordered 20 boys to climb aboard in the middle flatbed car. My brother and I were amongst them. The train left the station, the camp, and we arrived on the station, at the Treblinka station. It was only about 2 miles away. There were dozens of bodies were laying all over. Those were the people who were killed the day before. They were running to get some work. We picked up all the bodies. We picked up also parts of bodies. Those were people who jumped and they were hiding under the train. And when the train started moving, they were cut up in pieces. We came back into the camp and we started unloading. And then we saw people, workers are carrying clothing from that big building where all the people went. What happened? They were told to undress and they're going to take showers and be disinfected in the showers for diseases. And they never came back. And instead water, carbon monoxide came. And this was the clothing from the dead, from the dead people. And they took the clothing near a big building, what was standing near the ramp, maybe 1,000 feet long. This building was filled up with packages from Radom, I remember. And around this building, people were sitting and assorting the clothing, taking like big tablecloths and fill it up and tie it up in 2 knots and take it on big mountains of clothing. About noontime, an assessment came out with 2 boys carrying pails of water. A line formed. You have to understand, it was already 3.5 days since we had water. I'm sure the line wasn't 100%. I saw him reaching for his handgun and started shooting. In front of me, a boy started screaming his father was killed. And then I fell. I was shot in my right chest. The bullet burst my lungs and exited from the back. I fell. I was conscious. In seconds, my brother was near me. He started crying. I told him, "You don't cry here." And he got some help from somebody. He pulled me off, and he pulled me over to the boys who were sitting and assorting the clothing. He pulled off my blood-stained shirt and wiped me around with a towel. And then some boys found some iodine that poured it on me on both sides. And then he tied me up with another towel and put on a larger shirt on me. My cousin Chaim came around the cover and told my brother there's a doctor from our town bandaging a boy, a friend from school, who was shot in the elbow. And he's bandaging him in that big building with the clothing. My brother and my cousin grabbed me at the armpits and they took me there. The doctor was no more there. My brother pulled out some packages and he hit me between the packages. And he said he's going to try to get me some water. Never saw him again. I don't have even a picture of him. I was in that building 3 days. And then I was told that people are getting water in those 3 big pits. In one of the pits, they bring a body from the ramp and they're getting water. I sneaked out barefoot and I joined 3 other guys. You needed now 4 people to drag a body to the pits because those people were laying maybe 2 weeks, a week, maybe 10 days under the sun. The bodies were bloated and the stains were undescribable. I joined the 3 others and I got some water and I got back in unnoticed and I left some water for my friend Yotke Goldberg who was shot in the head. The next day I saw people are boarding up the entrances. I had to get out. My friend was afraid. He had this big bandage. I got out and started looking for my brother. I found a friend from school, Gedali Rosenzweig. He told me there are only 7 boys left from our town. The rest were killed the first day when we arrived. And all 7 are working in a special commando with red patches on the right side. And what they do when the people walk out of the trains to go to the big building, and they're undressed to take showers and they never come back, and they take out the clothing and they're making packages of this clothing. He helped me join the group. They all helped me. He found a piece of red cloth and he attached it with a safety pin to my pants. And they helped me join their group. Trains stopped coming. That time, it seems that the same day I arrived, the 24th of August, to Treblinka, a new commandant arrived from Sobibor, Franz Stangl. And he stopped all the trains since he started cleaning up the place. And people were working day and night to clean up the place. When the place was clean, our commando, the couple, was given 40 brooms. And we were told that tomorrow trains will start coming. And as soon as the people walk out, we have to clean out the trains, 2 to our cattle car. In Treblinka, only 20 cattle cars could go in. The next day, trains started coming from Warsaw. And the people walked out, it wasn't so crowded, they didn't push them in because they wanted to have the clothing. This way they didn't have the clothing anymore if they died in the trains. So they walked out and we cleaned out the trains. One day, a train arrived and everybody walked out. And there was this woman in a corner. She couldn't stand up. Her legs wouldn't hold her. She was sick. The assessment in charge started screaming, "Take her to the hospital." He made so much noise that the new arrivals should hear how good they're taking care of the sick and the wounded. Well, the hospital was one of the 3 big pits. It was surrounded with fresh pine branches every few days. And in this pit, all the garbage from the place was on fire. And believe me, there was a lot of garbage. And all the sick and the wounded were taken there. and shot in the neck and thrown in the pit. This was the hospital. About 10 minutes later, I was told there are infants are sitting near this pit, and the assessment left for his lunch. I grabbed some garbage and I ran there. It was very dangerous for me. And when I came there, I saw a dozen or more infants sitting. Not one of them was crying. Sitting and looking at the workers who came in with the garbage. And looking at the big fire with the burning flesh. And then I was told that the assessment came from his lunch, shot each one, and the workers threw in the tiny infants into the fire. Of all my memories of this factory of death, the vision of those babies is the worst. It's more than 64 years since it happened. I still can't forget the horror. Whenever I remind myself of Treblinka, I see their beautiful faces. I'll never forget them till I die. Every morning they were carrying out dead people from between the workers, mostly by hanging. They knew their families are gone and they killed themselves. And every night I was surprised to find myself alive. The 10th of September, 1942, an empty train arrived to pick up the mountains of clothing from the dead. There was no room to move around there. There was so much clothing. I grabbed a bundle on my back and I ran. You become like an animal. You just think how to get out. The brain works one way only. And it hit me, maybe. I grabbed the bundle on my back and I ran there. The sensor signed 2 workers to a kettle car. They didn't let me in. They took away the bundle from me. Again, I went again, I tried, nothing doing. But then these 20 kettle cars left, another 20 kettle cars empty arrived. And one of the boys from our town, a strong guy, a redhead, Morsky, his name was, started to load with another guy a train. He was a loader. He let me in. He let in 2 other boys, my friend Dale Rodensweig and a guy by the name of Michael Fishman. The train was filled up with clothing, and the train left the camp. It was on the station all night. They were adding on more trains. And in the morning, the train started moving. We climbed out from underneath, and about 15, 20 miles down the road, we broke open the little windows and we jumped. Somehow, some way, we made our way back to our town. When we arrived, where the Germans made a second ghetto, they forgot some boys and girls who were working on the farms. It was harvest time. And they forgotten them. So when they found out, they made a second ghetto, 3 houses. When we came there, we told the people what the Germans are doing to the Jews in Treblinka. At the beginning, nobody believed us. About 2 weeks later, my father escaped from the concentration camp, and we went hiding. We were hiding in a pigsty for a month, and the farmer was afraid to keep us. Then we were hiding. We built a hiding place in a fish pond, a fish hatchery, where we were there over 17 months. We were discovered by 2 farmers. We gave them money. After about 2.5 weeks, they demanded 100,000. Otherwise, they'll give us out to the Germans. We had to run. We ran into the forest, which was a half a mile away. And a little forest. We built another hole there. And we stayed there for about 2.5 months. There were 4 of us. My father, myself, and my friend Bear Goldberg, a brother of this guy who was shot in the elbow in Treblinka, and a barber from Berlin, who was chased out from Berlin in 1938. And somehow he wound up in our town. The next day, the 30th of July, 1944. We got out of the forest, my father and I and my friend Bear Goldberg. The barber said he stayed in the forest. And Germans discovered us, and they started chasing us. It seems that my friend Bear Goldberg, with his running, he saved me and my father, and he was killed. The next day, we were liberated by the Russian army. And the 1st of August 1944, we walked to our town. It was 3 miles away. When we arrived, of the 8,000 Jews, only 16 came back. A month later, I joined the 2nd Polish Army. And when the big offensive started on January 17, 1945, to liberate Warsaw, in that time, 10 days later, was Auschwitz liberated. I was on the front lines. I was fighting the Germans across Western Poland for 4 months into Eastern Germany, and to German soil. We were fighting in Upper Saxony when the war ended. I was proud that after 5 years of bloody and brutal persecution, I was still able to participate in Germany's defeat. Later that year, my father and I made our way to the DP camps in Western Germany, in the American zone, where the UNRWA set up displaced person camps. We stayed there for over 3 years. I got married. My father had a brother in Brooklyn who arrived here in 1911. He sent us papers, and we arrived in New York in 1949, July 1949. We raised a family. We raised 2 sons, Michael and Larry. Please stand up. My older son Larry is a biochemist, and Michael's a professor of mathematics at Columbia University. We have 7 grandchildren, and they, my grandchildren, are my answer to the final solution. Am Israel Chai. Thank you.
Weinstein. Mr. Weinstein.